Hello. I'm going to switch in English. So thank you, Patrice and the Architecture School of Bordeaux, Architecte, for organizing this event. So just a few words about the context of my PhD research of sociology. In France, between 2000 and 2,500 architects graduate each year. The large majority of them stay in France to work nearby their school, usually, and set up their activities of architecture or urbanism. Usually they begin as an employee in an office of architecture or urbanism or landscape, and after a little while of experimentation, on average at 35 years old, they do register on the national board, pay their professional insurance, and are legally allowed to sign their own plans. During almost 4 years, I investigated the French graduated in architecture in order to explain how do they practice abroad, what do they do, with whom, and what was their motivation to do so. I interviewed 80 architects. They do have international activities, and I sent out a questionnaire to all of the graduates in France. I received 1,700 answers. So let me introduce you to the main results of this research in 3 parts. First, we'll see the international conditions of their practice. Then we talk about the professional practices and the diversity of them. And to conclude, we'll talk about the profiles of the graduates that do work abroad. We'll see that it's not made for everyone, but we'll see that there are similarities between some of them. So if internationalization affects architects, it is because for the past 40 years or so, political, economic, cultural, and social decisions at national, European, and international level have guided and conditioned the practices of graduates. In general, the conditions for the action are favorable to the internationalization of architects at several levels. The French state perpetuates the tradition of cultural policy by supporting the profession in the development of its activities and promoting them at the national and international levels. In the 1980s, it was the cosmopolitization of architecture in France by welcoming international teams in association with local architects to carry out major public state commissions. Since the publication of the ministerial report on exports in 1995, a range of measures were put in place to encourage the profession and its internationalization. National prizes and promotion abroad, the promotion of young architects, exhibitions of French productions at world events, such as the Venice Biennale, the World Urban Forum, the Universal Exhibitions. Everything helped to promote the profession to work abroad. The Ministry of Culture and Communication, which is the Ministry of Architects, is implementing a strategy to promote, enhance, and disseminate part of a French production. So the political instruments for promoting the discipline are being structured and multiplied. Another level is the involvement in humanitarian action. It has received little media coverage, but has been a market sector since the 1970s, at the time of the Biafra War, when doctors broke with the neutrality of the Red Cross and created Doctors Without Borders. Architects took the lead with Architects Without Borders, then other associations and foundations appeared. This sector is a response to crises. Initially, the main field of action of doctors, parts of the architectural profession finds meaning in humanitarian activities. Humanitarian aid covers several types of practices, both famous practices by global icons, such as Shigeru Ban, but also confidential practices by organizations acting on behalf of states under secret defense, such as International Committee of the Red Cross. The sector oscillates between a social part claimed by the actors, an ideology that serves to raise funds and engage in actions, and another part is a market facet, less visible to the general donor public, but which has consequences on the organization of work, production chains, and the localities of the actions. At a third level, since the mid-1990s, the export activities of architectural services have oscillated between a symbolic part of representing the French state abroad and a business part based on the strategies to generate turnover and develop niche market sectors such as retail, merchandising, design, luxury decoration. Also, the symbolic and business aspects are linked. The first is the domain of professional institutions associated with ministerial bodies that deploy international mechanisms to promote French architects. The second, the business part, is the responsibility of export associations and international recruitment agencies, which participate in networking architecture professionals and promoting their work. Finally, and that is your concern, at the fourth level, the training system organizes and transmits knowledge and a collective identity. In France, recruitment follows a grande école approach, favoring students from the upper social classes. Students are used to traveling as families or alone. They are being encouraged to spend a year abroad during the course, and their families are able to provide financial support for travel. Since 1919, students have been able to receive the European scholarship to spend a semester or a year abroad. International mobility facilitates their integration into the network of globalized markets. The year in the distance often acts as a trigger for future international careers. In addition to Erasmus, students benefit from a wide range of internationalization measures, workshops, voluntary and volunteer work camps, internships abroad, and soon a break year are playing a major role in boosting internationalization dynamics. So these levels, cultural, solidarity and social, economic and training, provide a backdrop for a new market entrance. Depending on their background, cultures and ambitions, professionals can position themselves in one sector or another. In France or abroad, the architect is not just a designer-builder. I have identified 5 professional segments that have never been studied before as a whole, and which I have called alter architects, humanitarian, institutional, entrepreneur, and icons. These are interest groups which share common values and mechanisms for action. I interviewed architects and members of institutions and associations from each group and spent a moment of immersion with them, meetings, training. I will briefly describe them to you. So the Alter Architects, first group, spread a culture of sustainable and social development. They are teachers, researchers, theorists, journalists, critics, and sometimes practitioners based in private practice. I had the opportunity to meet the researchers of the Cratère laboratory in Grenoble School, who founded in the 1980s an association and a laboratory dedicated to the expertise of earth construction. Today, there are 70 members associated with physics, chemistry, and geology labs to work the earth as a building material, as a heritage, as a habitat. They have a UNESCO chair that allows them to shine in 40 universities around the world and to disseminate knowledge to academic and professional audiences. Major stars such as Renzo Piano come to consult them. Humanitarian aid workers is the second group. They are engaged to meet primary needs in health, education, and housing. They work for associations, organizations in emergency or development situation, often called southern countries. I interviewed architects from international organizations, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, as well as professionals working for national associations or foundations. Some mandated by states to act in crisis or war situations, mobilize different skills than others, which operate in a context of development and solidarity. They acquire the skills of engineers, technicians, managers, and building supervisors. The institutional is the third segment. They are experts, specialists in the fields of heritage and urban planning in particular. Close to the ministerial spheres and integrating to long-standing networks such as UNESCO, they disseminate French style in North America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. I spent a year observing the work of architects in heritage training at the Chaillot School in Paris. They have been participating in highly structured international study programs since the 1980s. Ministries support and participate in actions, as do several world organizations and institutions dedicated to heritage. Not only practitioners, heritage architects also produce research and link up with other disciplines such as archaeology and history. Since the amplification of the effects of globalization at the end of the 1980s and 1990s, entrepreneurs, the fourth segment, have been pursuing the objective of economic development of companies. They compete with other agencies, participate in international competitions, and welcome young graduates in their office. I interviewed here French graduates of small companies based in France who export their services. Beyond architectural competitions to access foreign markets, I have detected a tendency on their part to use intermediaries, which I called agencies, agents, trained in international law and trade, who put them in contact with clients, particularly in Europe. And finally, the icons, the last group, are the barometer of the profession. All segments take it as a reference. The image of French architects is not simply exotic on the world stage, but in terms of areas of expertise or the presence of French stars working elsewhere makes sense. So thanks to the investigation of the thesis and the questionnaire, 4 profiles are highlighted according to the intensity of the international in-personal path career and professional practices. So this represents the 4 groups. You can see insiders, cumulate, plus and plus. So we have some people, they are international in their interests, in their personal path, and they do work international. At the contrary, universalists are not really socialized with international during their personal paths and are not really working abroad. Betweeners are interested in their personal paths, but don't really work abroad. And strategists never were really interested in international during their life, but are strategically working abroad. So I will talk briefly about each of them. The insiders is the first profile, integrate the international scale into their mode of practice and their definition of the profession. The international dimension among insiders is an obvious fact, an extension of their career path, their professional and cultural socialization. They expatriate, build some family in another country, and do not plan to return to France. They travel frequently, open subsidiaries, and partner with foreign teams. The international is part of their heritage. They are often of immigrant origin, have several nationalities, or have been strongly open to other cultures. In their case, international is a routine which is part of their tasks in the same way as missions in France. Thanks to their families, teachers, and institutions, insiders are confident about their role in other countries. For the betweeners, the international remains an ideal to achieve, and the exercise between France and other countries an intermediate way to achieve it. They alternate between a position in France and occasional assignment abroad. They have often had the ambition to work elsewhere, but have been caught up by cultural constraints, or the founding of a family, or professional problems related to different modes of exercise. There is a regret in their testimonies, and also they are satisfied with what they have in France. They do not lose the hope of working more firmly one day in the international scene. The betweener symbolizes the fact that internationalization is not for everyone, that obstacles have quickly arrived, and that the borders between national and international are as quickly closed as they have been opened. The strategist's third profile build a career by multiplying international experiences. Without being surrounded by cosmopolitan families, they have been able to seize opportunities of internationalization during the training course, multiplying small food jobs and internships abroad. They are highly integrated into professional networks, participate in European trade fairs, and have an entrepreneurial spirit. They do not hesitate to travel frequently or even to go abroad if an opportunity arises. For strategists, international practice is not an achievement but it is built through choices, struggles, and time. Often, they have continued their studies after architecture, and beyond the title, they possess several skills: economist, urban planner, engineer. Finally, the universalists practice mainly in France, with the world as a reference. They use their theoretical knowledge to invent their own practice and teach. As experts of the world's architectural scenes, they capitalize on knowledge from different continents and disseminate it to the French public. They can be theorists, researchers, critics, or journalists, and also work as architects, project managers, and teachers. Often, they have had experience working abroad, but they realize that there were no point in acting far away when the same needs exist in France. International, for them, is a reservoir of reflections, of references, that serves as a field of exploration for new practices, alternative productions, than those conveyed by national models. So to conclude, because some of you are sleeping, the policies observed at national, European, and international level support, facilitate, but do not determine the actions of professionals. This research has shown that graduates arrange their paths and practices by selecting the range of existing devices, but also by differentiating themselves from a nationally regulated profession. Finding niche activities and ways of moving from one practice to another is necessary to work in foreign territories, where neither the culture, professional codes, nor the operating methods are defined in the same way as in French territory, which often gives a greater margin of freedom. Thank you. If you have a question.
Il y a des questions. Yes. Où est-ce que c'est ça? C'est quelle ville?
Shanghai, I think.
Shanghai, oui. Des questions.
L'opéra de Shanghai.
Ah, ça, oui.
Please, could you say in one sentence what is the outcome of this great research? Some recommendation, a proposal that, for example, maybe in the result of the research, the groups can be arranged with the following parts of the specialists that you mentioned. Has this some practical use, your research, or this is just research to summarize the results?
During this research, I did every year some intervention in France. I don't know if it works in the same way. After the graduate, we do an habilitation, professional habilitation, for architects to be able to open their own office. So it's a training for a year. And so I did some interventions with the new graduates to talk about concretely how can you go abroad to work your practice abroad. So this first is you have to do research to show those results, those 5 possibilities, 5 practices, but also to talk about the path, the career path possible, depending of your social path. And then a lot of students could link what they do, what they are, with what kind of practice they want to do in their life, and how can they move from practice. They're not locked up. They can move from one group to another. And the PhD explains a lot those circulations between the 5 groups, depending of your personal path. So this is but also in politics. This PhD had received a prize from the ministry to participate in the writing of the new strategy, national strategy policy, and a big chapter of the recommendation is the exportation and the internationalization. So there are some recommendations of this work that is already in the ministry with discussions that I could have with them.
D'autres questions? Les étudiants, vous n'avez pas de questions? Ah, Linda.
Just can you say us the ratio that you discovered by these interviews? With how many percentage are strategical or insiders?
Yeah. So I don't have. What I can tell is the global ratio with this questionnaire, which is not representative of the graduates, from the 1,700 answers, I had 28% of graduates, they work abroad, which is really different from the national board questionnaires. When they do interview people they register on board, they have 2%. They declare to work abroad. But I interview not only people they register on board, but also people they're not on the board. So they do different activities as construction. They do not need to be on the board to work. So this is a big result of this PhD, is to show that you have more chance to work abroad if you're not a builder, if you have diversified your activity as an architect. And then strategic betweener, insider. I don't have statistics for them because those profiles were written by interviewing the 80 architects, so it's not really it's not a statistic job for this part.
Did you find any differences between the generations?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, this is also in the introduction of the research to show of course, the diversification since this research I started with graduates from the 80s till now, till 2015, and since Erasmus program became almost like for everyone, there were a big turn in terms of opening the frontiers and give the motivation to work abroad. All the interview talk about that. All the people they did Erasmus, and I could prove it with the statistic, double their chance to work abroad later. So this is a big mark. But also, before it was more a culture of, it was always international culture in architecture, with travels in Villa Médicis or the Grand Tour in Europe and everywhere else, but it was made for an elite, for the best student. He was winning a prize and could go and be a brilliant architect. Now it's more massive. The mass can access to international with technologies and low-cost flights and workshops and a lot of different options.
Do you need different possibilities and not from the spirit?
I think it's linked, but the spirit, you would be in universalist. They do have this huge spirit, but they don't work abroad. If you do experience the international, you're able to repeat it. experience physically is really different than just theoretically know about the world. If you live 1 year abroad, you know you can expatriate. You made the experience, so it's easier.
Merci, merci Laura.
Thank you. Merci à vous.